children to school. I want to get the views of the Legal Resources Centre. It's Claire Rankin talking to us this afternoon. Hi, Claire. And we've been hearing so many people calling for a binding set of regulations and a change to the laws, but I always wonder, you can make all the laws and change all the regulations, it still comes down to implementation. That's where we always seem to fall over, isn't it?
No, definitely. I think you can't have any meaningful change unless we do see the law implemented. That being said, obviously, if we're going to see effective implementation, we do undeniably need to have something good to be able to implement in the first place. And I do think scholar transport specifically, because it sits at the intersection between two different government departments, is something that requires strong, good regulation in order to ensure effective implementation. Otherwise, we really just have a lot of uncertainty about whether the education department or transport department is responsible for implementing different aspects of the system.
So how do we then try and create this implementation? Where's that shortfall coming in? What needs to change? Is there one thing, I hate to ask soundbite questions, but is there one thing that we can do that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, at the Legal Resources Centre, we've been advocating and lobbying for years now for the ministers of basic education and the ministers of transport to exercise their regulatory power under the South African Schools Act and under the National Land Transportation Act, respectively, both of which empower those ministers to develop and promulgate regulations that would set in place binding uniform minimum norms and standards to regulate the provision of scholar transport. It's actually quite a good soundbite answer, because all that needs to change is those ministers really need to come to the party and promulgate regulations.
It's this debate we were having earlier in the week post this tragedy, Claire. We have the Department of Transport, we have the Department of Education, then we have school governing bodies, then we have MECs. And one of the comments made to me on air was that there's still just too many chefs in the kitchen. Of all those people, would it not be more streamlined, perhaps I'm not using the correct legal terminology here, you're the expert, a more streamlined way of doing this through one perhaps standalone form of government instead of everyone sort of sharing responsibility and sharing blame?
I mean, ordinarily, I can see the appeal in a streamlined, simplified process. And I think normally I would agree with you. But I do think here the problem is ultimately scholar transport really does straddle both work done by the Department of Transport and work done by the Department of Education. It has to take information from schools, it has to deliver learners to schools, but also at the same time you need to ensure that vehicles are roadworthy, you need to ensure that very particular tasks that are bestowed on departmental officials in the Department of Transport are executed. If we were to try and streamline it into just one department, we'd really have to then try and move certain functional areas into that department. And I think also we have to be realistic. We don't have the budget to try and replicate the work that one department is better equipped to do in another department just for the sake of streamlining the process. It's far better just to have a very well-regulated process that doesn't leave any room for uncertainty or ambiguity about who is exactly responsible for doing what.
Yeah, I don't have to rebuild the wheel, maybe just fix the spokes in the wheel. It's a fair point, Claire. I'm going to ask you to hold on for me, Claire. I want to just welcome to the discussion, just get some reaction from William Zulu, who's joining us as well, speaking to him earlier this week from the School Governing Association National, that is. William, wonderful to have you back on the show, so I appreciated our conversation earlier this week. What about calling this a state of disaster? Will that change anything in your mind? I know you made that call a few days. Do you still believe that's the way to go?
Thank you, Gerald, for inviting me again. Look, whether we call it a state of disaster, but let me assure you that if some loose ends are still left like that, at the end of the day, it won't help us.
What would help?
Well, we all have, as the speaker just alluded to, the issue of the two departments coming together, putting the policies together and amending it so that it can be a solid policy that can be used around the country for each and everyone who want to be in the sector of transporting the learners. Else, at the end of the day, it's still the same thing after another. And I can assure you, because of each and every department has its own role to play, but bringing them together will really, at the end of the day, no one will be held accountable. But at the end of the day, it will minimize this incident that we are having recently.
Claire, let me come back to you just on the legalities, perhaps around the owners of these vehicles. Many people are saying that this particular incident, we won't know if the vehicle was roadworthy. We know it was overloaded. We know that, but that's a human error issue there. Where in your mind does the responsibility fall on the owners? Because we know in the end this is also a business, and I've heard this argument in the past that they're trying to get as many people into taxis and school transports because it's simply more money. Where's the owner responsibility on this in your mind?
Look, it's quite difficult to say with certainty without really having more of the facts in front of me. But what I can tell you is that there is definitely some liability here on the owner. I think what we do know is emerging is we have a driver who didn't have the necessary permits to be able to drive the vehicle in the first place. And for any scholar transport operator, or really any public transport operator in general, to employ a driver who is not fully equipped and fully qualified to be able to transport people with the necessary PDP license, that is definitely something that will give rise to liability. To what degree we actually want to look at trying to pursue, criminal versus civil liability, that's always up for debate. But at the same time, I do think as well, we don't want to try and reduce the accountability that also should go on individuals who make decisions to drive recklessly in particular situations and place learners' lives at risk.
I'm going to come back to you again in a moment, Claire. I want to get your views on the Human Rights Commission and that detailed directive that you refer to in your statements. But William, I wanted to ask you perhaps a last question for now for you, William. The responsibility of the Transport Ministry. I saw this debate, actually, I heard this debate on radio the other day, and someone called in, I thought it was an interesting point. They said that not only should these drivers, William, have professional driving permits, PDPs, we know them as PDPs, but actually advanced driving licenses. I'm not sure if that is something that should be looked into. Do you think that'll make a difference, William Zulu?
Look, Gerald, when you enforce the policy, you minimize the chances of many accidents that might occur. One of them, it is the one that is it the MEC or the minister who proposed that these taxi drivers, specifically for the learners, must undergo that type of a training. We strongly believe and strongly agree as governing bodies, associations, to say, so be it, because at least we know that our children will be driven by someone who has an advanced driving. Remember, advanced driving entails a lot of things within it. This type of a driver that brought us where we are now, that type of negligence that he has applied, I don't think having to undergo in advanced driving will either, at the end of the day, find ourselves where we are. So that also will help us a lot, Gerald, if it might be put in place ASAP as proposed.
William Zulu, please stay on the line for me, sir. I'm going to just get a last comment from Claire Rankin as well before I say goodbye to both of you. Claire, I just want to refer to what I was reading earlier when it comes to the Human Rights Commission, Claire Rankin, about their detailed directives addressing systemic failures, including safety oversight and accountability. Once again, even the HRC seem to have this framework in place. And perhaps, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on the state of disaster question I posed to William Zulu. Would that make a difference? Where's the HRC on that, do you think? And would that bring about any change?
Look, I think, to be honest with you, a state of disaster isn't really going to fix the problem. And I think it is more reactive than we really need. Scholar transport is a problem across the country. It is a problem almost consistently every single year, both in terms of scholar transport provisioning on one hand, but also in terms of the tragedies that we see, much like the accident in Vanderbilt Park, that claim the lives of many learners. I don't think ultimately trying to, in response to these kind of tragedies, declare a state of disaster is going to change much, because what we need is broader systemic change. And really, we need to be proactive, and we need to be ensuring that we are changing the framework within which scholar transport is provided for, and where we see private scholar transport, where we see that regulated externally, in order to ensure that we have the right controls in place from the onset. The kind of frameworks and the kind of powers that we see afforded to the executive under states of disaster really aren't necessary to achieve any of these things. Like I said previously, the Minister of Basic Education, the Minister of Transport, they both ordinarily have the powers to create regulations and to create a framework that can really go a long way in extracting accountability. It would be unnecessary to enter into a state of disaster. And I think really we have to sit with the unfortunate reality and almost devastating conclusion is that the government already has a lot of the powers available to them to be able to enact meaningful change. There's just a lack of political will.
That's a good point, Claire. I want to actually ask William Zulu that, just to get his reaction. William, I think you're still with me. I know your line is a little iffy. William, if you are, do you want to react to what Claire is saying? I'm sure you have a view, William Zulu, on the lack of political will. Is that something you agree with?
I fully agree on that. I fully agree because of this engagement of the policies derives from the political will. Now, if there is no political will, rest assured that we still find ourselves where we are. I fully agree with you.
Well, to both of you, I'm very grateful for your time. William Zulu, you and I spoke earlier in the week. Once again, very grateful for your time, from the National Governors Association, and Claire Rankin from the Legal Resources Centre. Wonderful conversation with both of you. I do appreciate your time. What do you make of what Claire and William had to say? I'd love to get your views. It's your show as well.